Welcome to meeting number 6 of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Access to Information, Privacy and Ethics. So I'm going to dispense with, we're starting late because of votes. I'm going to dispense with parts of the regular preamble. I think members are familiar with what how we operate. And so today's, pursuant to Standing Order 108.3H, and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, January 13th, 2022, the committee commenced its study on the collection and use of mobility data by the Government of Canada. So today, I would like to, in this first panel, welcome our witnesses. Our witnesses attend as individuals. First, we have witnesses Anne Kavukian, Executive Director, Global Privacy and Security by Design, and Teresa Skaza, Canada Research Chair in Information Law and Policy, Faculty of Law, Common Law Section, University of Ottawa. We will get right into the opening statements from our witnesses, which will be 5 minutes each, absolute maximum, please. And so we'll begin with Dr. Kavukian. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, sir. I'm very pleased to be able to speak to you today, but I was so concerned with the complete lack of transparency on the part of PHAC, the Public Health Agency of Canada. Transparency is critical on the part of government agencies. Of course, they report to individual citizens, and there was no transparency associated with PHAC accessing, I think they said it was 33 million Canadians' cell phone data. And I found it so disturbing. And I have to read one thing to you, which really resonated to me. MP René Villemure, he said, and I quote, "PHAC was using the data without telling anybody," end of quote. That to me is appalling. You don't just operate by yourself as a government agency accessing people's very sensitive mobile data. And they didn't consult with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Commissioner Daniel Terrien. And I'm quoting Commissioner Terrien. He said, "I don't think that anyone would seriously argue that most users knew how their data was being used. Did the government inform users that their mobility data would be used for public health purposes?" So the question of transparency and notice to individuals, to the public, of how information is being used, sensitive data, such as health data, this is critical. Mobility data, Mobility data, when you track it, you know where people have been, who they've been associating with, the movements, etc. And I know you might say, well, but the data was de-identified. No problem. There's always problems. It's not a 100% solution, de-identifying data, as you know. Phishing, hacking, ransomware, this is huge. There are brilliant hackers who gain access to so much personal information. And the fact that no one was aware within the government that this was happening, the total lack of transparency and notice, that's what concerned me enormously. I always say privacy is all about control. It's about personal control relating to the use and disclosure of your personal information. And location, mobile data, this is very sensitive. Nobody knew this was happening. And that's what I find so alarming. And that's why I'm focusing on the lack of transparency. I want to suggest to you that it is high time for us to upgrade our privacy laws. PIPEDA, the federal private sector legislation, came in the early 2000s. Our Privacy Act for public sector came in the 80s. These are old statutes. We need to upgrade them and make them reflect what's taking place today in terms of the massive gaining access to personal data and tracking the data and all kinds of implications and conclusions that can be made on the basis of that without any notice being provided whatsoever. The public is not aware of the fact that this is taking place. And the fact that the government did this without consulting the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, they'll say, oh, well, we told them. I know what the commissioner said. The commissioner said they informed us, but there was no consultation in terms of gaining my input on whether this was appropriate or not. Having served as a privacy commissioner for many years in Ontario, it's absolutely critical to connect with the privacy commissioner and his team where they can look under the hood, so to speak. I always say trust but verify. But these days, I don't even say trust. You need to look under the hood at the data gathering practices, what's taking place, and you need to make the public aware of what's taking place. This kind of openness and transparency is absolutely critical. So I'll end my remarks by just emphasizing that these things can't be done quietly behind the scenes. No, the government has to be open and transparent and consult with people such as the privacy commissioner and provide notice. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And now for up to 5 minutes, Dr. Skaza.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the invitation to address this committee on this important issue. The use of mobility data and the reaction to it highlights some of the particular challenges of our digital and data society. It confirms that people are genuinely concerned about how their data are used. It also shows that they struggle to keep abreast of the volume of collection, the multiple actors engaged in collection and processing, and the ways in which their data are shared with and used by others. In this context, consent alone is insufficient to protect individuals. The situation also makes clear that data are collected and curated for purposes that go well beyond maintaining consumer relationships or customer relationships. Data are the fuel of analytics, profiling, and AI. Some of these uses are desirable and socially beneficial. Others are harmful or deeply exploitative. The challenge is to facilitate the positive uses and to stop the harmful and exploitative ones. The situation also illustrates how easily data now flow from the private sector to the public sector in Canada. Our current legal framework governs public and private sector uses of personal data separately. Our laws need to be better adapted to address the flow of data across sectors. Governments have always collected data and used it to inform decision-making. Today, they have access to some of the same tools for big data analytics and AI as the private sector, and they have access to vast quantities of data to feed those analytics. We want governments to make informed decisions based on the best available data, but we also want to prevent excessive intrusions upon privacy. Both PIPEDA and the Privacy Act must be modernized so that they can provide appropriate rules and principles to govern the use of data in a transformed and transforming digital environment. The work of this committee on the mobility data issue could inform this modernization process. As you've already heard from other witnesses, PIPEDA and the Privacy Act currently apply only to data about identifiable individuals. This creates an uncomfortable gray zone for de-identified data. The Privacy Commissioner must have some capacity to oversee the use of de-identified data, at the very least to ensure that re-identification does not take place. For example, the province of Ontario addressed this issue in 2019 amendments to its public sector data protection law. Amendments defined de-identified information for the purposes of use by government, required the development of data standards for de-identified data, and provided specific penalties for the re-identification of de-identified personal data. The discussion paper on the modernization of the Privacy Act speaks of the need for a new framework to facilitate the use of de-identified personal information by government, but we await a bill to know what form that might take. The former Bill C-11, the bill to amend the Personal Information Protection and Electronic Documents Act that died on the order paper last fall, specifically defined de-identified personal information. It also created exceptions to the requirements of knowledge and consent to enable organizations to de-identify personal information in their possession and to use or disclose it in some circumstances also without knowledge and consent. It would have required de-identification measures proportional to the sensitivity of the information and would have prohibited the re-identification of de-identified personal information with stiff penalties. The former Bill C-11 would also have allowed private sector organizations to share de-identified data without knowledge or consent with certain entities, particularly government actors, for socially beneficial purposes. This provision would have applied to the specific situation before this committee right now. It would have permitted this kind of data sharing and without the knowledge or consent of the individuals whose data were de-identified and shared. The same provision or a revised version of it will likely be in the next bill to reform PIPEDA that's introduced into Parliament. When this happens, important questions to consider will be the scope of this provision. How should socially beneficial purposes be defined? What degree of transparency should be required on the part of organizations who share our de-identified information? And how will the sharing of information for socially beneficial purposes by private sector organizations with the government dovetail with any new obligations for the public sector, including whether there should be any prior review or approval of plans to acquire and or use the data, and what degree of transparency is required? And I hope that the work of this committee on the mobility data issue will help to inform these important discussions. Thank you.
So we go to the first questioner of the 6-minute round. So with Mr. Kurek, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and I appreciate both of the witnesses joining us here at the committee today from your opening statements. It's been very helpful for you to be able to share your expertise. Dr. Cavoukian, you mentioned in your opening statement that privacy is about control, and certainly we heard from the privacy commissioner about the lack of consultation, and it appears to be the lack of control metrics, frameworks in place regarding the data that PHAC would have received. Can you speak more about the need for that control within a framework to ensure that data is protected?
I personally am a very strong believer in exercising control and allowing individuals to exercise control over the uses of their data. Traditionally, this has been linked with identifiable data. So it has your name and address, other identifiers linked to it. And then, of course, you should be able to exercise total control. There are means by which the data can be strongly de-identified, as has taken place here. And then our laws, the way they are in existing right now, our laws no longer apply, because if data is considered to be de-identified, then they no longer fall under privacy laws. And that's one of the reasons I believe we need to upgrade our laws and reflect that in this day and age, even if you have strongly de-identified data, and there are very strong ways of de-identifying data, I'm not going to suggest otherwise, but even if you have that, the ability to re-identify, the risk of re-identification still exists. And I would like us also to explore other means of de-identification. For example, there are now new forms of de-identification that tend to have an extremely low risk of re-identification. This is called synthetic data. And this is now growing and being used. So what I'm urging is that people need to be able to retain control of their data. And especially with mobility data, which is so sensitive. I think if anyone had been asked, which PHAC did not do, if anyone had asked or given notice to the 33 million Canadians whose information, mobility data they gained access to, if they would have consented to that, no way, in my view. I think it would be highly unlikely. Yeah. So I think we need to upgrade.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. And you started, I think, to answer the second question that I had is the ability to re-identify anonymized and aggregated data. Now the government's response thus far, and the minister a number of weeks ago said, "Don't worry, it's anonymized and aggregated. Just trust us." Can you speak to some of the concerns that exist around re-identifying some of that data? And yeah.
I want to be clear. They did go to great lengths to strongly de-identify the data and then use it in aggregate form. So that does minimize the risk of re-identification. I don't want to suggest otherwise. I'm just saying that with mobility data, your cell phone, which lives with you, basically goes everywhere with you, there is such a sensitivity associated with that and all the locations you go to and who you may associate with, that if the data were able to be re-identified and connections made on the part of the government, I think that would be extremely troubling. So at the very least, the government should have provided notice to the public saying, this is what we're doing. Here's why we're doing it. We want to track your movements, in this COVID pandemic world. Is that sufficient reason? Would people have felt that the return was sufficient? We've got to have some debate about these issues. PHAC can't just decide to do that, as the MP said, without telling anybody. That's what I objected to the most, the total lack of transparency.
Oh, and I appreciate that. Thank you. So part of the concern that I have had is I've seen a copy of a slide deck provided to the government by the company Blue Dot, and the information in that slide deck was very, very general, aggregated. But in the appendix, it spoke of very, very detailed information that Blue Dot was receiving. Are you confident that the information that has been provided to public health, it seems to be more detailed than what that slide deck entailed, but we don't know exactly what anonymized and aggregated meant. Are you confident that it has respected Canadians' privacy?
Well, what you just told me, I find very concerning, quite frankly. I didn't realize there would have been, I mean, I understand the general data would appear very general and you couldn't get anything, but you just referred to another slide or data that was much more specific. So that concerns me enormously. That's why I want our Federal Privacy Commission, Daniel Terrien, to be looking under the hood at all of this. Why was he not consulted as opposed to just being informed? That's completely unacceptable, because the minute you get into anything that is more potentially identifiable or detailed, as you were just describing, sir, that's when all the concerns arise. We can't have that.
Okay, thank you very much, Doctor. And one quick question for Dr. Scassa. I hope I got that right. So you mentioned that there must be standards for de-identified data. Are you confident that those standards exist within the information that's been provided for the government with the data that was used?
I don't have any direct knowledge of particular data standards that were used with respect to de-identifying the data that were the mobility data in question. But it is, if legislation is going to extend to de-identified data, which it should certainly extend to addressing or identifying what standards should apply, what de-identification standards should apply to data. And
this with further questions, I'm going to have to go to Ms. Hefner now for 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, and thank you to the witnesses for joining us today on this very important issue. And I do want to come back to you, Ms. Scassa. Last month, you did a news interview and you spoke about how many of the stories around this mobility data issue focused on the government processing of the data rather than the fact that it's actually private companies that collect and sell location data. Can you elaborate on why that's an important distinction?
Well, I think it's part of the overall data ecosystem, some people refer to it, in which we find ourselves. And it's that movement that I spoke about between private and public sector, the flows of data from private to public sector. So there's a tremendous amount of mobility data being collected by all kinds of actors in the private sector. And there were at the beginning of the pandemic and throughout the pandemic, companies like Google and Fitbit were publishing their analytics based on people's mobility data, analytics for Canadian cities and Canadian areas. So this mobility data about us is collected by many different private sector actors, and there are commercial applications for these data. And as we can see in this example, government can be a client for that data. So I think that's why it's important that we need to think about modernizing both our private sector and our public sector data protection laws. And we need to think about the way in which data flows from the private sector to the public sector and is then used by the public sector. And I think that in particular, that flow between public and private has been one that hasn't really been well considered in legislation in the past. But certainly the collection in the private sector context of these enormous quantities of data, and not just location data, but very fine-grained data about all of our activities, is a real issue.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to go back to Ann Cavoukian too. Thank you, and address a couple of things that you talked about in your opening statement. First of all, there's no 33 million. So that's a false number that keeps getting circulated. So I just want to make that clear. TELUS does not have 33 million customers. So there's a lot of misinformation that's circulating.
Point of order.
Oh.
What is your point of order, Mr. First, state what is outside of usual practice or a rule, and state your point of order. Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Ms. Hefner.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Just going to find my point again here. So, I've totally lost my point. You were concerned, though, Anne, about the lack of transparency, and that was your point. And actually what we heard from the privacy commissioner when he came to speak to this committee was that he agreed the Prime Minister did put out a news release when the government started accessing mobility data from private collectors. There is a public website where people can go and at any time check to see how this data is being used to inform the pandemic response. And the Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Theresa Tam, was regularly putting out messages on social media and in many other ways to show how this data was being used. So I know I wasn't in government at the time, but I knew that this was happening. And the privacy commissioner, when I asked him, couldn't answer how the government could have been more transparent in this process. So I'm wondering if maybe you can give us some suggestions about how the process could have been even more transparent than it already was.
With due respect, I don't. Oh, sorry. I'm reverberating. Okay, now I'm fine. There was no, I don't call that transparency. And I know Commissioner Tallien very well. He did not say that his office was consulted on this, not at all. Being informed of something is very different from being consulted on something. You go to someone to consult them because they have expertise in an area. And as he said, he would have looked under the hood. It's essential to examine how information is being de-identified, aggregated, used in a variety of different purposes. Things can go wrong in a million different places. And also, he may have said, I think we need to notify the public. I wasn't aware of any of this as a member of the public until I read the stories about it that broke out, and all relating to the complaints associated with this, and the fact that, John Brassard and others were saying nobody knows anything about this. It hasn't gone to the ethics committee. It was, in my view, not transparent. And so just because if you know what website to go to and look underneath, you can find something, that's not transparency. In my view, you have to push it out. Tell people, tell the public what you're doing with their information, with their mobility data. And I'm not going to suggest that there was transparency here.
Okay. Back to Ms. Skaza, I'm wondering if you can talk about something else that the Privacy Commissioner brought up, that it may not be realistic or reasonable to get meaningful consent in every instance, and yet the data, mobility data is very useful in a public health response. And I'm wondering if you can just comment on whether you see the usefulness of mobility data and whether governments should have use of this data that's already being collected to respond to something like a pandemic.
Yeah, and so I think that question gets at something that is really at the heart of the digital and data society, that there is such a huge volume of data being collected that it becomes impossible to rely on individual consent for all uses. There have to be mechanisms in place to supplement consent in some circumstances. We don't have the time, the energy, the ability to manage consent for all of the data that are collected about us and with everything that we do. So consent remains important, but it's not enough. There need to be other measures in place. There can be many socially beneficial.
I'm sorry, once again, I'm going to have to do this. Our panelists will have to stop asking you questions when they're actually out of time. I'll now move on to Monsieur Villemure.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you to our witnesses. Ms. Kavukian, we are all well-informed Canadians, and yet we had no idea what was going on. The presumption of consent, is that the same thing as true consent? Because People couldn't consent, so we presumed that they consented. What do you think of this?
I don't think we can make any assumptions that there was a presumption of consent. Not at all. At the very least, and I know consent is difficult. I agree that doing this on a large scale can be extremely difficult to do. I understand all of that, but at the very least, provide notice, meaning you publicize as the guy. You are the government. You're PHAC. You publicize that you're doing this. At the very least, you go to the commissioner, the privacy commissioner, and alert him and ask for his input and assistance in making sure that the public is aware of what's being taking place. It's being strongly de-identified and aggregated, and therefore the commissioner feels it's appropriate, something like that. You don't do it quietly, in my view. I think that's a big mistake.
Assurément, la présomption de consent.
So presumption of consent is not true consent, just like publishing data on COVID trends is not the same as making the information public. You talked about trust earlier. And I feel that what PHAC is doing instead brings about distrust. And do you believe this is unethical?
I totally agree with you that this grows distrust. There's already such fleeting trust anyway. Trust of government is diminishing on a daily basis, and this just leads to the further erosion of trust. I'm very concerned about that because certainly one would say you should be able to trust your government. I don't believe we're in a position to do that right now.
Maintenant, lors de sa comparution, le ministre.
When the minister was here, he stated, "Don't worry, everything was de-identified." But then we were also told that people were concerned. Why do you believe that the commissioner was not consulted but only informed?
That's a very good question, sir. It baffles my mind. I honestly have no idea. When I served as commissioner in Ontario, I was always consulted. And if I hadn't been consulted, especially in something like this, I would have been extremely concerned because that's my business, is to get under the hood and look at what's taking place. I cannot imagine why the government, PHAC, did not consult properly with the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Daniel Terrien, who is an excellent commissioner in this role. It makes no sense to me.
Et donc, des situations comme.
So in situations like this works on the erosion of trust people have towards their government. And according to you, this is not a good thing. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you qualify what PHAC has done?
Oh, I hesitate to put a number on it, sir, only because I just would probably give it the lowest number, and I don't want to be unfair. I haven't, examined everything, but this contributes to the erosion of trust enormously, and there is already so much distrust out there. Let's leave it at that.
D'accord, je comprends tout à fait votre réponse.
I understand you completely. So probably under 5 anyway for now. So Canadians can't understand what's going on. And even if data was published and there were press releases, they underestimated the need for understanding. There were barriers to transparency. And I learned, as you did, through the media, what was going on. I find it hard to believe that the government keeps denying what's obvious. Have you seen a situation like this one before?
I must admit, this was staggering to me. I had not seen anything on this scale with such a large number of individuals' mobility data being accessed without any notice to the individuals. Forget about consent, but just notice and public awareness, so that someone would know what was taking place. And you see, the other thing is, when you take this to the privacy commissioner, had they consulted, the commissioner would also examine the benefit of engaging in this kind of access to the data versus what are the results going to be. So they track people's movements. What is the benefit of that? I don't know. And I say that as a question. None of this is open.
Dr. Tam également était d'accord que c'était pas tout.
Dr. Tam also agreed that this wasn't necessarily very useful. Do you think that something similar could have been done in Europe under their laws?
They have such strong privacy laws. The GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, came into place in 2018. It is one of the strongest laws that exists. And I was delighted it includes my privacy by design in it, which strengthens even more, builds privacy, embeds it into the code of your operations, so that I don't think they could have done this.
I totally agree with you. I worked on the GDPR with the European Commission, and je suis tout à fait.
I'm absolutely shocked by what can happen. So now, looking at where we're at, what can we do?
I'm sorry that we're out on this one. We'll have to go to Mr. Green.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and welcome to all the guests. A really important discussion is being had. I want to note, Dr. Skaza, I thought your intervention provided some very direct, hopefully some points that will be picked up in our study as recommendations. And I want the opportunity to expand on that, because one of the issues I've had is the one that you've raised, which is the relationship between public and private data collection. And I suggested in a previous meeting, in fact, that it might be the case that our government institutions are basically outsourcing privacy breaches. So I want to start from that frame through you, Mr. Chair, to Dr. Skaza, who identified this relationship between public and private and suggested perhaps that too much emphasis was being put on the government's possession on it and not enough on the private collection of it. So through you, Mr. Chair, to Dr. Skaza, in your opinion, could this program have been guilty of potentially outsourcing a privacy breach, for lack of a better term?
That's an interesting question, and if I'm just going to give a different example, the Clearview AI situation, where you had a private sector company that created a facial recognition database based on scraped data that was then used by the RCMP. The Privacy Commissioner has already said that you can't have a legitimate use of data that was collected illegitimately. Legitimate use by a government actor of data that was collected illegitimately. And so I think that relationship is always interesting and an important one. One of the challenges is when we think, there is on the one hand, you want to facilitate the use of data for socially beneficial purposes. The private sector is collecting vast quantities of data. There are legitimate questions in some cases about the quality of the consent and the quality of the collection practices and the kinds of data that are collected. In this case, we're looking at mobility data, which are very sensitive, but there's lots of other very sensitive data as well. And so it does become really important to think about that massive amount of data that's being collected under all sorts of privacy policies that we don't have the time or even the skills to read and understand completely, that may become a product that is then sold to government as well as to other actors for their analytics. And so, right there, you have that, if there's flaws in that collection and then it is sold, then I think you carry over those flaws and those issues into the subsequent uses of those data. So I do think that relationship is tremendously important.
Let me put the question in another way. If the government had acquired the information directly, in your opinion, would that have been a cause for concern? If there wasn't third party, but the government was actively tracking citizens in this way through the security establishment or through cell phone towers, like we've seen with police through using Stingray, for instance, or other Pegasus type of, well, I guess that's still third party, but.
Yeah, I see your question, and it's an interesting one. I mean, if the government is engaging in that kind of surveillance, and there are certain rules that that the government has to follow specifically with respect to their collection of that data. And here it's being sourced from the private sector. And so it does fall under a different set of rules. Now it's de-identified and so on, and it doesn't have the same weight or impact as surveillance data would have, or the same implications necessarily as surveillance data would have, depending on how it's used and on the context. But it's also data that the government doesn't really have the capacity to collect in that fine-grained and detailed way. And again, the privacy issues are very important, but the ability for governments to use the best available data to make important decisions is public policy decisions is also important too. And so the trick is finding that appropriate balance between the two.
I indeed agree through you, Mr. Chair, the appropriateness and the idea of what is deemed to be legitimate, even for the commercial interest. I reference Google Streets. I know that you've been talking about Fitbit and Google. I had my insurance policy renewal come up, and they talked about me putting an app on my phone that would track the speeds to be able to give me time off or a reduction in my rates. And so I'm really concerned about the pervasiveness of the commodification of personal data and the way that it's being used as a bit of a panoptic prison. I'm wondering if you could comment, Dr. Skaza, through the chair, international gold standards. So we've referenced the European model, but in your opinion, which country has the highest standard of privacy and consumer protection and the separation between kind of commercial and public interest? Like, if you were to recommend to this committee an intervention that we can do to be the gold standard, what would that intervention be, to speak directly?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I think that the gold standard that is usually the reference point would be the GDPR in Europe and the rules that have been put in place there, with the proviso that it's not there's no way to just copy what's in the GDPR and transplant it to the Canadian context. Every country has its own particular context, and so it's not just a question of saying, well, that's the one that we need to have. But I think that the GDPR does set an excellent standard.
Thank you. And with that, we're out of time, and we're going to the next round. The next two questioners will have 5 minutes each, beginning with Mr. Patzer.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for coming. Ms. Kavukian, I think it's fair to say that for a lot of people out there, having their location data collected without their knowledge or consent, that there is a level of trust that has been damaged and, quite frankly, broken. How important is public trust when it comes to issues like this?
I think public trust is essential in terms of building it, because it is fleeting right now. And that concerns me so much. In the past, when I used to go and speak to public groups, I would have to explain why privacy was important and why I thought they should care about it. I don't have to do that anymore. When I go and I speak to the public, they are so concerned about it. The public opinion polls in the last 2 years, Pew Internet Research and others, have come in at the 90 percentile in terms of concern for privacy. 90% concerned about their privacy. 92% very concerned about loss of their information. I mean, this is huge. I've been in this business well over 20 years. I've never seen such enormous concern consistently in the 90 percentile associated with loss of privacy. And so the trust or lack thereof that exists right now with government is staggering. As I said, I've been in this business for many, many years. I've never seen it escalate as it has now. And the growth of surveillance that follows that, it's massive. A lot of times people say to me, oh, you just got to give up on privacy. It's just not possible anymore. No, we don't give up on privacy. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. If you want to live in a free and open society, we have to have privacy. And so I fight for this, even though trust is waning. Let's build it up. Let's get our governments to be honest with what they're doing with our information and at least notify us. It's having it under the hood, not letting people know about it, just grows distrust, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I've seen some interesting commentary around just the amount of surveillance that's gone on during the pandemic. And when compared to what happened post 9/11, it dwarfs what happened back then, what's going on right now. I was wondering if you have any more comments on that.
Oh, I was commissioner. Oh, sorry. Okay, is it okay now? All right. I was commissioner during 9/11, and obviously it was enormously troublesome. But when 9/11 ended, see, during a crisis, a pandemic, an emergency, there are emergency measures that can be introduced to put the privacy laws on hold. The problem is, after the pandemic or emergency ends, often those continue, those emergency measures, and transparency goes out the door, surveillance grows, and it has continued to grow. And that's what I'm concerned about with the pandemic now, is the pandemic will, God willing, be coming to an end. Measures are already being lifted in terms of our restrictions. We have to ensure that measures that are taking place during these emergencies are suspended after the emergency is over, because we need to restore trust and we need to restore privacy. We can't have people believing, well, we just have to give up on privacy. No, you never, ever give up on privacy. Privacy and freedom, they go hand in hand. They're both essential.
Thank you for that statement. That's very important. I used to work in the telecommunications industry for 10 years prior to being elected. And it's my experience that people's data, even like as far as a smart home goes, your level of protection is only as good as the individual who's trying to access it. And you mentioned earlier synthetic data, but what else needs to be done, above and beyond de-anonymized data to actually try to really protect people? Because, and I've seen other reports where, they had a sample of 100,000, they were able to re-identify about 92% of all users. So there's obviously some issues. So what more needs to be done here?
We have to get serious about getting the messaging out about privacy and the measures that need to be invoked at the time when the technology is introduced. A lot of people are want to protect their homes, so they have all kinds of measures to do that. But it often intrudes upon their neighbor's privacy, because the cameras capture information not just from that household, but from those around it. So starting with what should be the appropriate restrictions on technology that is intended to be surveilling, and what do you do about that, and how do you minimize that in terms of its impact on others who don't want to be involved in it and who haven't introduced it into their lives and homes? These are the measures. We need to have measures that reduce the collection of data, surveillance, and maximize privacy choices that people can make.
Great, thank you. And with that, we will go to Ms. Sachs.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'd like to thank our witnesses that are joining us here today. It's a very fruitful conversation. Dr. Scassa, I'd like to start with you, if I may. You made some important points with my colleague, Mr. Green, about the difference between surveillance data and mobility data. And, TELUS for Good was the sole sourced contract in December 2020 through PHAC at that time, which prior to that, the Prime Minister and both Dr. Tam had been very clear that they were using TELUS for Good, the TELUS Data for Good platform, which from what I understand that data there is used by universities and other university researchers, health authorities, and others are using the Insights platform in collecting really important data that we need during the health crisis. And from what I understand, they even received the seal of approval of the Privacy by Design certification on their work. So that was the sole service data provider to PHAC from the time of the public and transparent announcement that was made in April 2020 until the contract of December 2020, right through to October 2021. So in what you've described in this process, would you say, if you were a TELUS user, would you be comfortable knowing that you could have opted in or opted out, and knowing that that data which PHAC used was not surveillance but mobility data?
Yeah, to be perfectly honest, I have no problem with my mobility data being used for legitimate public health purposes in the middle of a pandemic. I have more problem with it being used to push ads for cheaper coffee or, whatever promotions as I travel around, right? So for me, that's more of a privacy concern than the use of my de-identified mobility data for socially beneficial purposes. And I think this goes to the balance that we need to find.
Of course, and I appreciate that, because the TELUS Data for Good platform, which was the sole source provider to PHAC for that initial year, Dr. Kavukian said, look under the hood. Well, the Privacy Commissioner was informed in April 2020 as well, and didn't raise any alarm bells about looking under the hood at that time, and was informed, and from his own testimony had weekly meeting or bi-weekly meetings with PHAC through the duration of that first year, and also in the preparation of the RFP for the forthcoming year after that. So, in just so that we're all clear on the process that's taken place, that Canadians had ample access to public information, whether they choose to look. There's a lot of data, and there's a lot of information in the news cycles as well, and it's a really difficult thing to process of what you're being told in a news cycle in the middle of a health pandemic. But Dr. Tam, through COVID Tracker and other sources, was very transparent with the public of using data that was on a public platform. Would you agree with that assessment, Dr. Scassa?
Yeah, well, I guess what I would say here is that I think that part of the problem in this whole situation is the fact that we have companies and we have governments trying to do their best to address how to use data appropriately in this environment for socially beneficial purposes, but we don't have the updated legal frameworks that would apply to them. And so it's, we don't have clear provisions that say this is what you need to do. This is the role of the Privacy Commissioner with respect to de-identified data. This is how transparency is achieved when data is shared for socially beneficial purposes. And this is how we define those purposes. So all of this has taken place in this context where we don't have the modernized frameworks for this type of activity in place.
And I would agree
May
with
I
you.
add very quickly that TELUS for Good is excellent. I have no problem with that at all.
Thank you. Okay, I think my time is up, Mr. Chair. Is that correct?
I think you've got half a minute. So go ahead if you've got another question.
in going. So like all of us, I have one of these with agreements on them and so forth. And Dr. Scassa, through the chair to you, I really appreciated your comments on understanding that the client consumer relationship when it comes to these devices has dramatically changed in terms of the volumes of information that we're dealing with, and also of how they've become a part of our daily lives. And perhaps a written answer to this is, what recommendations would you want to see us considering going forward in tabling something like C11 or recommendations for this committee to provide on upcoming legislation?
All right, and it will have to be a written submission or later in the panel, because it is now time for Monsieur Villemieux for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have 2 questions for you, Ms. Kavukian. Here's my first. Some people told me that, well, if there's nothing to hide, what's the issue? And I would like to hear your opinion on that.
That always makes me laugh. That could have been the motto of the Stasi police in the Third Reich, because they tell people, well, if you have nothing to hide, what's wrong with the state knowing everything about you? It is absurd. It's the exact opposite of freedom. Please let us preserve our freedom. Privacy forms the foundation of our freedom. It's nonsense that you have to reveal everything to the world and to the government.
L'association entre...
So the link between privacy and freedom is clear, and we don't have to share everything with the government. Now, there was a call for offer for a second contract, and we requested to suspend this tender, but we don't know what's going to happen. But in that tender, there was a mention that data could be used after the pandemic. 2 things interest me. We don't know who's going to say that the pandemic is over, and 2, the data can be used after, but for what? To what end?
And that's what I would object to. As I mentioned, after 9/11, it was the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The measures that were introduced during 9/11 were intended to end after the emergency was over. They didn't. And that's always a concern with measures that are introduced during something like a pandemic, an emergency situation, to ensure that they will no longer continue afterwards. I would be very concerned about that.
D'accord. Donc,
So, if we could improve the law, what would be your two main recommendations?
Oh, I would want to be able to work with, so for example, TELUS, that did TELUS for Good, they're excellent at de-identifying and protecting data. They have privacy by design certification. I'd want to work with them and with the government to see how can we make some uses of beneficial information while completely preserving our privacy, perhaps introducing synthetic data. Let's explore different options. This is what I would like to introduce in legislation.
d'accord. Oui, il me reste 10 secondes.
Very well. I think I have 10 seconds left, so thank you. Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to ask any questions for Dr. Scassa, but thank you.
Yeah, 2.5 goes by quickly. And now to Mr. Green.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask Dr. Scassa, who referenced an updated legal framework, what exceptions, if any, should exist with respect to the collection, use, and disclosure of anonymized or de-identified information by the government?
Thank you for the question. I was concerned by the wording in the exception for in Bill C-11 for socially use of data for socially beneficial purposes that referred to the sharing of this data without knowledge or consent. And so I think that this transparency issue that Dr. Kavoukian has spoken about and that has been debated and discussed is fundamentally important here. There needs to be some transparency mechanism so that people can understand how their data are being used. And there may also need to be some sort of governance framework in place that sets parameters for, that puts limits on the use and that sets perhaps an ethical framework for the use if that's necessary.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, respecting the committee's time, I would just like to say to that point, the Privacy Commissioner has been clear as well with a recommendation that strengthening up that office in a third-party way would help them pursue that proactively, as well as doing audits in the private sector, which I think would be an important point. Mr. Chair, I'd like to now just present this committee with a notice of motion, which will be distributed by the clerk in both official languages. I'll use my last minute to do that so as not to take up anybody else's time. Is that okay?
Motion.
That pursuant to Standing Order 1083H, that committee send for from the Public Health Agency of Canada and Health Canada the privacy impact assessment and all documents used to inform the privacy impact assessment developed with regard to PHAC's use of mobility data tracking for COVID-19, and that these documents be received by committee no later than March 4th, 2022. Mr. Chair, I'm happy to just put that as a notice of motion, something that we should hopefully be able to debate and with the support of this committee pass and hopefully get that information on to create a deeper understanding of what measures this agency took in pursuing this contract. Thank you.
And thank you. And with that, we, in this panel, just in the interest of making up some of the time that we lost due to votes for the last two questioners, I'm just going to go to 2 minutes each. So we'll have 2 minutes for Mr. Kurek, and then 2 minutes from Mr. Fergus, and that will conclude the first panel.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and to Dr. Kavoukian. As Mr. Villemere mentioned, the concern in the RFP is that this data is not only going to be used for use in the fight against COVID, but it was very open-ended in terms of what the future of use could be. I'm wondering if you have further comments on that. And then I hope to get one more question in. So,
having specific limits placed on use is absolutely critical. If you don't identify what the primary purposes of the data collection is, the main use, then secondary uses always arise. We can use it for this purpose or that purpose. It can have a whole series of beneficial uses that could be contemplated.
And
so I think.
And if I could, sorry, with a short amount of time, I've heard from some constituents that are concerned that the data that the Public Health Agency of Canada may have received may not be limited to use within the Public Health Agency, that it could be shared with other departments. Is that a concern that you would share?
Of course. How do we know what restrictions have been placed on the use of the data by PHAC or others in government? We know nothing. And that's why looking under the hood by the Federal Privacy Commissioner is absolutely essential, and auditing all of this.
I appreciate that, and certainly as a rural parliamentarian, I've heard also some concerns about the data that may be aggregated in an urban center where there's hundreds of thousands or millions of people versus a small community where there's dozens or hundreds. I'm wondering if you could unpack that maybe in the little bit of time that's left.
The way in which these kind of data are put together, as you mentioned, millions of people versus a small community. Obviously, if you have a very small community, it leads to the identifiability of those in that community. And that's always a concern. And that's why, again, you should always involve the Federal Privacy Commissioner, who can examine all of that and make sure that the proper protections have been put into place.
Great timing. And now for the final 2-minute question round, Mr. Fergus.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Chair, and thank you to our witnesses. I'm going to be very brief. Dr. Kavoukian, thank you for your testimony, and I just want to make sure I understand. At our last meeting, Dr. LMM had talked about how there are really good ways to reduce the possibility of data being re-identified, admitting perhaps that there's no perfect way, but there are world standard practices to bring it down. Does TELUS Data for Good meet those requirements in your opinion?
I would have to look at it hands-on. TELUS Data for Good does amazing work. I have looked at TELUS's work in other areas in terms of their de-identification of data and aggregation, and they do an excellent job. So I agree with Dr. Khaled El-Imam, who is the expert in this area, that they are doing it properly. So my concerns are not with the de-identification process followed by them.
Okay, so your concern is not about the de-identification process.
It's about the transparency or lack thereof.
Sure. So let me I'm just trying to, I agree there's a larger issue, and Mr. Green's questions would speak to that, or my colleagues would speak to that, but I'm really trying to understand what the Public Health Agency had received from TELUS's data. And I just want to, again, I think I'm hearing from you that you feel that the information that they received was de-identified to the best standards possible.
I'm sure it was. They are excellent in this field. So I want to repeat, my concerns was not with their methodology, was with the government's lack of transparency and letting the public know what they were doing.
Okay, but I just want to make sure that, so that Canadians can sort of feel, in terms of the information that they got, this wasn't government surveilling them. This was using de-identified data that came from a legitimate source. Can I ask you just to confirm that?
Yes, I will confirm that.
Thank you very much. On that front, then, I want to also make sure that you would feel, and if I could have you just clarify this, that using that industry standard approach.
Sorry,
Mr.
Fergus, I struggled to get my mic activated there. You're quite out of time, and in fact,
thank you, Mr.
Dr.
Chair, for your
for
keeping me on the straight now. And I'd like to. I'm sorry I did not have an opportunity to speak to you, Dr. Escasa, as well. But thank you both to the witnesses.
Yeah, with that, I'm going to suspend and thank our witnesses, but really. Because of how badly over time we are, I'm going to suspend and hopefully very quickly sound test our next panel's witnesses and begin the second panel as soon as possible. So meeting suspended. This is now we begin our second panel of today's meeting. And so we have today, I'd like to welcome our new witnesses, Dr. Martin French, Associate Professor, Department of Sociology and Anthropology, Concordia University, and Dr. Daniel Weinstock, Full Professor, Department of Philosophy, University of Montreal. Dr. French, you have 5 minutes for your opening statement. Absolute maximum on opening statements, just for time, 5 minutes each. Go ahead, Dr. French.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and members of the committee for the invitation to speak with you today. So I've been studying public health surveillance from a sociological perspective since 2003 when I started my doctoral studies. And over the years since completing my doctoral work, I've continued to write about surveillance in public health and medical care contexts. As a sociologist, I tend to prioritize different questions than public health professionals might when considering public health surveillance systems. I share public health professionals' concerns, evaluative concerns that touch on questions of efficacy, efficiency, utility, timeliness, and so on. But as or even more important to me are social questions about how surveillance or its effects might be experienced by people in their everyday lives. I'm interested, for example, in whether people might be advantaged or disadvantaged by surveillance. So in my research, I tend to ask critical questions about public health surveillance systems. Perhaps it goes without saying, but I should also stress that while I ask critical questions, I am not against surveillance. In fact, I participate nearly every week in the Flu Watchers Surveillance Initiative, which is operated by the Public Health Agency of Canada. And this is one of the surveillance systems that provides data for the COVID trends website mentioned by Minister Duclos in his remarks before this committee. So I believe that public health surveillance can be valuable, and I wouldn't want to see the Public Health Agency's innovations thrown out with the bathwater. But I'd like to use my time here today to put one critical question about equity on the table for the committee's consideration. I believe that members of this committee have been asking vital questions about privacy and consent in relation to the Public Health Agency's mobility tracking work. And in addition to my fellow witnesses here today and to witnesses that I believe the committee is going to be hearing from in the days to come, Dr. Christopher Parsons, Dr. David Murakami-Wood, Dr. David Lyon, and others, I think these issues are going to be well covered. I just want to say that I share the concerns of these witnesses, and I want to add an emphasis to what they're saying and a focus on equity questions. And this question in particular, who may experience intensified risks or harms as a result of mobility tracking? In her remarks before this committee on February 3, Dr. Tam mentioned that mobility tracking could be used to understand the efficacy of public health measures. She stated, and I'm going to quote here, mobility data at this kind of aggregate level can be used to see if provinces and territories or local jurisdictions, when they enact public health measures to reduce contact rates or ask people to stay home, for example, whether those are actually working. Well, what would happen if these data were to show that people, for example, in a Montreal neighborhood where I live, are not in fact staying home? Is it possible that these data would correlate to an intensification of policing or enforcement in that neighborhood? Now, I would like to know if the Public Health Agency of Canada is thinking about mobility tracking in relation to social scientific work on policing the pandemic, for example, led by Dr. Alexander McClelland, Alex Luscombe, and the Canadian Civil Liberties Association. Because of such equity questions, I would like to encourage the Public Health Agency and the Government of Canada to be even more forthcoming in their discussion of emergent surveillance and contact tracing technologies. I think I'm nearly out of time, but I can give you an example of what I'm talking about with reference to the COVID Alert Contact Tracing Act application if members want to pose questions about this. Let me just conclude by saying that I'm speaking today informed by the previous research that I've done, and not from empirical data that I've been gathering about this particular mobility tracking initiative. So I'll ask the committee members to please keep this limitation in mind while considering my preceding remarks, and I'll stop there. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, and we'll now go to Dr. Weinstock. You have up to 5 minutes for your opening statement.
Thank you. Merci beaucoup. I'm going to take 10 seconds of my time to correct the presentation that was made of me. I've been at McGill University now for 10 years. So I'm in the Faculty of Law and the Department of Philosophy at McGill University. So I'm not an expert on privacy. My work has focused on, I think, a number of areas, but two that are significant or relevant to our present discussions are, on the one hand, the justification and the limits on the justification of rights limitations in a liberal democracy. What processes and arguments can be put forward in order to justify limiting standard liberal democratic rights and freedoms? So, and I've done that across a wide range of rights, including religious rights. How do we justify the limitation of religious freedoms? The other aspect of my work that is relevant, I think, to our discussions today has to do with the conditions of trust in government. What are the conditions? How does government make itself trustworthy, which is probably the most important question? And what are the mechanisms through which it can, in a legitimate manner, elicit the trust of the population? So I think that there are relevant things to say in both those domains, and I'll say them quite briefly. So I live in Quebec, and my perspective is probably colored by that fact. And I would say that in general, there has been a kind of process in Quebec of what I would call armchair proportionality testing that has occurred in a fairly regular way, where the government has been imposed upon itself to present to the population justifications of the fairly substantial restrictions that it has imposed on people's freedoms and rights, mobility rights, rights of association, and has often experienced pushback when it's been felt that either it hasn't shown that there was enough evidence to prove that the restriction was one that was necessary to achieve the goal, or that perhaps it was overly restrictive given the achievement of the goal. So there's a kind of a parallel between the sort of formal demonstration of proportionality that one finds, for example, in the Oakes test, and the kind of garden variety proportionality testing that makes it the case that the population looks at restrictions that have been put in place and says, okay, you know, I may not agree totally, but at least there is an attempt at being transparent and public about these restrictions. Là où je pense qu'il y a un problème.
Where I think there is an issue with data tracing is that there are no restrictions, there are no measures that limit Canadians' capacity to associate. The surveillance is fairly invisible in that way. The goal is not to restrict their activities, but rather to measure it. So the pressure that the government has to justify their surveillance is not the same as if there would be a restriction. If we were telling people you can't do something, they would request a justification. And I think that here there might be a temptation to not be open to justification, and the government should resist that. If the government is not open and transparent with the means used for surveillance, they should talk about the limits, the type of data collected, the risks associated, because all of that could create distrust. Perhaps there shouldn't be distrust, because if the government were to share its justifications, well then there might not be a problem with distrust. So that's where I see an issue with the context that we're in right now. We need to reflect not only on the measures that the different levels of governments need to take to explain these restrictions, but also the measures that they need to take to ensure that they do not create mistrust. And there was a committee member talking about Canadians said that if they have nothing to hide of the data, why not be open and transparent and be forthcoming to the media and share their intentions? And the government can share the ways that the data is collected. So I'll stop there And I think I'm out of time anyway.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. And we're going to go to our first round. This will be 6-minute questions, and beginning with Mr. Carrick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you to Dr. French. Well, first, thank you to our witnesses. Appreciate you coming to our committee today and sharing your expertise with us. Dr. French, you talked about the Flu Watchers app and the website, the platform, and how that's informed some of the COVID trends data. But a key difference there is one is consent based and one is informed by a whole range of other data. Could you provide comment on the difference between consent for data being collected voluntarily or consent being directly given versus some of the wide variety of collection that might have taken place on the COVID trends map?
I can try. I think. Thank you very much for the question. I think that the Flu Watchers, for example, I participate, as I mentioned, in that. I received an invitation to participate. I consented to participate. So I know that when I'm responding to the emails, the Public Health Agency of Canada is going to, take that data, the information that I'm giving them, and hopefully, use it to inform their epidemiological work. But I think with mobility tracking, a number of members on this committee, witnesses, have been raising consent issues, and I think that these are really challenging issues because I think that in a lot of ways it's not clear. It's not clear to me, and maybe members of the committee could please correct me if I'm wrong about the specific details of this. But it's not clear to me that every member of the TELUS network, for example, knew that they were, if they didn't want to have their data included, they should opt out. So I think that my sense is, and I don't want to just impugn this particular initiative, I think that this is a general cultural practice that we have of, clicking I agree. I think Monsieur Villemure said this before in comments before this committee. It's just our culture today. We don't tend to read the terms of service and privacy policies, and so we're not often aware. And how could we be? They're often not written very clearly. They're not written to be, read easily or understood. So this is, I think, a big problem that many organizations today that are using personal health information, mobility data, and other kinds of information, even after they aggregate it, for example, de-identify it, there's still this kind of issue of consent maybe looming in the background more generally.
Thank you, Dr. French. And I don't mean to cut you off, but we do have a short period of time for questions. And I'm hoping to get this question to both doctors here. You both inference the use of this data for its directed purpose by the government, but the possibility of there being unintended consequences, whether that be maybe different departments, even if it was aggregated or anonymized, that information may not just simply stay within the Public Health Agency of Canada. So Dr. Weinstock, maybe I'll start with you, if you could, in about 30 seconds, hopefully, talk about some of the concern that might be raised with that.
Yeah, I mean, you've said it yourself. So rather than I think that one of the things that will increase trust in the process is if there are very, very clear self-imposed limits by the government, which of course won't guarantee that there won't be leakage from one department to another, but which will give Canadians and watchdogs, like the privacy watchdog, a clear threshold, a clear benchmark on the basis of which they can say, what you've done here outrepasse, to use the French word, the limits that you yourself have imposed upon yourself in order to justify before Canadians the use of this data. So I think it's very important that there just be these very clear limits on the basis of which accountability can be very concretely based.
Thank you. Dr. French, would you have a quick response to that?
Sorry, just echoing that, I think that, we know that early on in the pandemic, first responders in Ontario, including police, were accessing COVID testing databases before the practice was stopped. We need to ensure that stronger firewalls are put in place, I think, around data that's collected for health and public health purposes.
Yeah, thank you very much. And hopefully a quick question for Dr. Weinstock. The pushback on restrictions, and I know this committee voted unanimously, and then all the opposition parties voted to press pause on the RFP to continue this data collection. And you talked about pushback on restrictions. I'm just wondering if you have any comments on that and the need for the government to respect that pushback that's happened from both Parliament and committees.
Well, if I understand the question correctly, I mean, I think we're in a very different time now than we were 2 years ago, where, I think that the government has to take into account. I mean, all I'm saying is premised on the assumption that everything that's being done in this domain is perfectly justifiable. I think that we are at a time where trusted government requires that justification be done in a much more overt manner than might have been the case at the very beginning of the pandemic, when the general population were perhaps willing to give perhaps a longer leash, as it were, to the government to act in the public interest. Think about emergencies.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstock. We'll go now to Mr. Fergus.
Effectivement, merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Dr. French and Dr. Weinstock, for being here today. Dr. Weinstock, on your last point, I find it very interesting. I listen to you on Radio-Canada fairly frequently, and I think it was just before Christmas you talked about this and the importance of context to have Canadians trust. The question that I have for you is that the federal government did not do surveillance. They used de-identified and aggregated data. Perhaps, as you said, the public would have tolerated this better at the beginning of the pandemic than at the end. But do you think that this was problematic for people to know that their depersonalized data was used to influence decisions or influence the decisions of the different levels of government and allows them to determine which measures are going to be the most efficient to deal with the pandemic? Answer: 2 things. I'm not an expert on the matter of data. When I was invited to the committee, I did my due diligence, and I asked some of my colleagues from the Faculty of Law, who are experts, to ask if data could be robustly anonymized, and I got a couple smiles from my colleagues who said, so if the data is aggregated and depersonalized, if it could be repersonalized, we should use a principle of precaution and put in place measures that would be based on the hypothesis that they could be. So you have to prepare for the worst, in a sense. Another thing that I would say is that the current use of data by the government is not necessarily bad, but what are the conditions to inspire confidence for Canadians? There's an article in the National Post that stated that perhaps Ms. Tam could be invited to your committee, and perhaps Ms. Tam or the Prime Minister could say to Canadians, we want to be open and transparent. We believe that we can make great gains for public health by using your data. This is the data that we're going to use, and we guarantee that we'll have sunset clauses. These are the limits of the use of your data. Go ahead. I apologize for interrupting you. It's only because we only have 6 minutes, and it's unfortunate because this is a really great discussion. It's hard when you invite two professors to keep it short. So this is what happened in April 2020. Dr. Tam said, this is the data that we're going to use. The data will be aggregated and de-identified. This is what we're going to use to measure things, and we'll use it at different levels of government throughout the country, and a website was created. Could this increase the trust, or at least not decrease the trust, or not increase distrust regarding the use of that data? Answer. Quickly, I think that it needs to be an elected official that says that needs to say that. I think that decisions on such crucial use of data, well, we trust our elected officials to make these decisions. And I think that in the country, there was a lot of confusion regarding what the responsibility is of public health and of our elected officials. So I think that it's up to the elected officials to communicate all the information. I apologize, Mr. Chair. I wasn't watching the time. How much time do I have? Great.
If I could, again, on this point, we had witnesses in the previous panel who are experts in privacy who indicated that the TELUS Data for Good program, although not perfect, like Dr. Weinstock was when he was speaking to his colleagues, certainly met the best practices possible to ensure that this anonymized information cannot be re-identified or cannot identify people afterwards. According, from your perspective, is that sufficient, or must we go for perfection? Is it sufficient to have industry-leading standards, or must we go further?
Thank you for the question. I don't think we can reach perfection, but I would like, I think we should go further. I feel like from the research that I've been doing, that we do
we're talking about this TELUS Data for Good perspective. I just want to make sure that we're not talking about generally, because there are other companies who aren't as
Mr. Fergus, you actually used all of your time in asking, almost all of your time in asking your question. We're significantly
I'm sorry. So if I could ask the witnesses if they wish to answer that, if they could just send us a couple of notes
they
in
can
writing, that
respond
would
in
be
writing,
helpful.
and we're going to move on to Monsieur Villeneuve.
We can incorporate that into the committee report. Thank you.
Bonjour, je vais commencer
I would like to start by thanking both the witnesses, and I will ask my questions to both of them. I would like to start by saying the following, and all of the witnesses have said it. I don't think that the ultimate goal of public health was I don't think they had any ill will. But Dr. Weinstock, in a more polarized world where people have distrust, they're more easily distrustful, and in the current context and with the current government, where, for example, with the We Charity, well, there were always issues. And this time when we talked to the Minister of Health, we're told it's not that bad, it's not that bad. What does this do to the trust that people have to our institutions to trivialize the matters? I'll try to be brief. Polarization is a game with many players. And there are a lot of different players, for example, the media, but a politician, a careful politician, needs to be able to read the room. And then they can gauge how to communicate with Canadians. Media are often now looking for the littlest issue to increase the polarization, to attract attention. In the current context, and I don't want to point fingers as who's responsible for this division, but elected officials who represent the government need to reduce this division. So I don't want to point any fingers, put the blame on anyone, but I think in the current situation, there are certain cases where people were creating scandals where there was no room to there didn't need to be one. But in hiding things, in not communicating with the ethics commissioner, then we create more division, and it's unfortunate in the current context. And I'll stop there. Thank you very much. And do you believe that in March 2020, the Prime Minister and Dr. Tam, if they had created or when they had their press conference and talked about COVID trends and all of that, was that enough? Was that transparent? Answer: 2 years in a pandemic is a long time, and things that were said 2 years ago should be perhaps repeated, said again, because so much has happened and there's been a lot of back and forth between limits. Well, I don't think that it's something that can be stated at the beginning of the pandemic and never brought up again. Very well. Dr. French, same question for you. The website, COVID Trends, the press release, is this sufficient for making the situation public?
I think I would just simply say that I would like to see more the Public Health Agency of Canada and the government of Canada be more forthcoming. I feel like they are doing a good job, but I think that there's further to go. And I could point you, I mentioned the COVID Alert app, which is something that I've studied. If we look at the privacy policy, which is on the website, I mean, objectively speaking, in terms of the landscape of privacy policies out there, it's pretty good. Mm-hmm. Like it's much more legible than a lot of privacy policies. Nevertheless, there are still, like, if you're an Android OS user, you have to click through that policy to see actually the way that the API works through Google Play to allow Google to access your mobility, your location data. So I do think that we need to go further.
Merci beaucoup. Dr. Weinstock,
thank you. Dr. Weinstock, do you believe objectively that the effects of things that have happened since March 2020 and the fact that we asked for a pause in the tender, do you think that all of these things that have happened are building trust, or is it the other way around? Answer.
En anglais, mais bon, c'est difficile de ne pas.
It seems a little partisan, where it might not be the case. Dr. Tam stated that waiting a few weeks for the committee to share its report wouldn't be the end of the world. So I think that perhaps when the government does the cost-benefit analysis of its partisan activities, they don't necessarily examine the feelings that they could create. The worst paradox would be that inaudible.
You were over time, and I was just going to encourage you to wrap up. And with that, I'm going to go to Mr. Green, and you have 6 minutes.
Thank you. Certainly an incredible opportunity to have another panel of subject matter experts on this. I want to pick up and put the same question to this group of witnesses as I had the previous group, which when I heard Dr. French talk about updated legal frameworks, my question is, what exception, if any, should exist with respect to the collection, use, and disclosure of anonymized or de-identified information?
Thanks for the question. If I'm understanding it, just to clarify, actually, could I just ask for a clarification? What exception in law should there be?
Well, I would say not just in law, but in ethics. In your research on privacy, we are always balancing the public good. And you had mentioned your support for the active use of what is being called digital epidemiology to provide evidence-based decision-making for our public health agencies. But I'm putting to you, what exceptions, if any, should exist with respect to collection, use, and disclosure of anonymized and de-identified information? My hope is that coming out of the study, we'll have some prescriptive recommendations from this committee that will provide perhaps guardrails. And I'll give another example. I moved a motion, I put it as a notice of motion, the idea of better understanding privacy impact assessments and how the government processes the balance of those two considerations when moving forward for the public interest.
Yes, thank you for that clarification. I agree. I think that there's, let's say, a history of, in public health, of crisis response, and understandably, public health has, articulated surveillance systems to respond to crises. And sometimes these operate at a bit of a lower sort of oversight threshold because of the emergency nature of the response. So I think, working with that culture, working to push that culture, or let's say enable the culture. I mean, I think that public health professionals have had a tremendously challenging time in this pandemic, and being under-resourced, for example. Could we resource our public health professionals better to attend to things like, these kinds of implications that I've been flagging, the privacy implications of the, crisis decisions that they're having to make.
Dr. Weinstock, before I get to you, I just want to carry that on as a supplementary question. Dr. French, you are quoted as saying that there are populations that could experience an intensification of tracking that could be harmful. This committee in upcoming weeks and months is going to be looking at AI, facial recognition, and as I referenced the idea of digital epidemiology, I was reading a review from Canada's initial response to COVID-19 from the Canadian Public Health Association, which lays out all the ways in which our information is shared globally through the Global Public Health Intelligence Network. Could you identify any potentials for concern, not just related to this, but also more broadly, of ways in which AI, could present a problem for some groups?
This is a broad question. Thank you. I'm not sure I can give a short answer to it, but I think that there are historical examples of epidemiological data collected for good reason, but being then subsequently used in stigmatizing ways. I could point you to the 1982 publication of an article in the CDC's MMWR, their epidemiological weekly report that identified Kaposi sarcoma in Haitian communities. And we know subsequently, if I could point you also to my colleague, Dr. Viviane Namaste's work and a 2019 book, Savoir Créole, which talked about the experience of the Montreal Haitian community with this stigmatization that emerges post 1982. So I'm thinking sociologically about these kind of longer effects of specific programs, if I could put it like that in response to your question. I think we need to do better going forward.
I'm going to say this, and this is
1 minute.
not a stretch, but given where we're at in front of Parliament, we've heard today from Dr. Weinstock talking about the feelings, and we know that through AI, there could be the opportunity. In fact, several Canadian universities are conducting research to develop analytical approaches on some of these challenges, and they're using things like social media data, trying to sift through and find out where the public feeling is on particular issues to hopefully be able to shift some of our popular education and public education resources and our communications to hopefully offset this this bit of a powder keg that we're seeing. Could you care to comment on the use of digital epidemiology, for lack of a better term, on that? Or if you could maybe perhaps provide any additional comments in writing, as I know my time is now up. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And second response, if possible.
How long?
10 seconds.
I probably would be, it'd probably be better if I tried to
right.
provide you something in writing. I don't
Sounds
know how to
good.
say
Then
anything
we'll move
in 10
on.
seconds.
Thank you. So we are going to end up going over time, even with just with the second round. So my proposal is I'm going to go 4 minutes each for MPs Patzer and Bain, 2 minutes each for MPs Villemeux and Green, and then just a 1 minute question from MPs Soroka and Khalid. That'll take us about 5 minutes over time. If that's roughly acceptable, then I'm going to proceed with that right now and go to Mr. Patzer for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. French here. I serve a very large rural riding, and I think there's been a lot of, concern from residents who, being, harassed by the government. They already live out in a rural area. They're already basically isolating by default. And they've been harassed about that. But when we look at the de-identified data, how much easier is it to re-identify data for people living in rural areas compared to somebody that's living in a massive urban center?
Thanks for your question. I mean, I don't think I have anything to add to this this response beyond what we heard, for example, from Dr. Kavukian and Dr. Skaza today. So I think it is the smaller the population, the greater the risk of identification in any kind of data set, probably. But I'm not an expert on an expert on de and re-identification.
You mentioned in an article in the National Post, some populations that could experience an intensification of tracking that could have harmful repercussions. I'm just wondering if you could provide some context around that or a few comments there.
Sure, I'll try. It was a bigger email response that sort of statement was highlighted in. I was just talking again about, I think what I've mentioned in my comments today, this possibility of using mobility data, other organizations using mobility data to guide their activities. It's not something that we know a lot about, but these data leakages, let's say, they do happen from time to time. And so I was simply trying to point to the fact that sometimes this mobility data can be used by organizations, like Dr. Tam said, to make recommendations or identify problems, right? People are, for example, not obeying lockdown regulations or curfew, for example. and my question is, what happens after that recommendation is made? Do we see an intensification of enforcement? Does that intensification, if we do see that, fall potentially on communities that are dealing with other issues? Maybe they have to be, maybe they're doing shift work or what have you. Anyway, it's, I'm not sure if I'm being clear in my answer, but
that's helpful. So I appreciate that. I've only got about 30 seconds left. So Mr. Weinstock, quick question for you. I got a lot of constituents who are, understandably angry and frustrated about basically having been spied on or surveilled, and then the data that they're generating being used against them by the government. I'm just wondering if there's a philosophical or an ethical argument there.
Yeah, again, I think that there are important uses that can be made of data, which in other circumstances than that of a pandemic, we would expect to be private. And I think that publicity on the ends to which this data is being placed, the limits on the use of the data, both temporal limits, when are we going to stop doing it? What is the indicator with respect to the pandemic that is going to make us say, okay, we're no longer in an emergency situation that justifies this extraordinary use of data? I think that would go a long way in reducing some of that
Dr. Weinstock, I'm going to have to go to Mr. Bain now for 4 minutes.
Okay, thank you, and thank you for both doctors joining us today, taking some time. My question is directed to Dr. French. You talked about a little bit earlier about like terms of reference, and we know that this de-identified mobility movements have an opt-out feature. Like what in your mind can we do, moving forward to strengthen or look at, government and these companies on working together in the future? Like what can we do to look at those terms? And you mentioned how the public doesn't really look at the terms of reference.
Thank you for the question. I guess a brief answer would be a twofold answer. I think that there's a lot of work to educate people. A lot of work to do to educate people about data flows that are related to their use of mobile telephony. So that's one thing. I mean, I would tend to like to see an opt-in approach rather than an opt-out, but I know that also has costs in terms of uptake, in terms of implementation, and so I think that's a debate, but I would like to see an opt-in orientation.
Right, but if you were to have like an opt-in feature, like doesn't that speak to the usefulness of the actual mobility movements and in this nature of the pandemic and to try to work towards for the public, the public good, really, like does the opt-in feature then just ultimately make this not so useful exercise?
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that question. I think that it's a great and a big question, I think, but yes, I'm not sure how to answer that. I think maybe it would be good to, I suppose we could hold the Flu Watchers program, for example, which is an opt-in initiative, side by side with mobility tracking, which is opt-out. I know that Dr. Tam said they give very different data. So I recognize that the Public Health Agency of Canada needs and sees a value in mobility data. And I'm coming at this not as a public health professional, but as a sociologist. So I also recognize that I have limitations in my kind of position. I want to make that clear. But I think that these are two different approaches to consent. And from a privacy perspective, I would tend to favor an opt-in approach like Flu Watchers.
Okay, and how much time do I have?
You've got about 40 seconds.
Well, I'll just say thank you for joining us, and I'll leave it at that.
And we thank you, Mr. Bain, for keeping us on time. We'll go to...
You were right the first time, Baines.
Baines, my apologies. Just getting to know some of my new colleagues. So thank you for
I'm
the
new
correction.
too.
And I will go to Monsieur Villemure pour 2 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. For Mr. Weinstock, earlier you gave me a bit of an epiphany because since the beginning, I don't want to presume that there's ill will, but there was a difficult balance between protecting privacy and public health. And earlier you brought forward another element. The balance that's hard to find is the partisan reflexes and public health. Can you tell us more about that? Answer. I think that idea of balance is very important. And to get back to what was said with Mr. Baines and Mr. French, what makes the current situation difficult is that public health and the data can only be useful if they get a lot of data. So it's even more difficult to find this balance when the opt-in would not necessarily be the greatest approach. And with regards to partisanship, our political system is that with elections every 4 years, it's hard to not have politicians that are measuring what they do according to that election calendar. Sometimes what people want in prolonged emergency situations that span over 2 years, well, they would hope that these politicians would go beyond petty politics. And if they don't, it can alienate Canadians. I don't know if I was clear. It seems very clear. Thank you very much.
We're now going to go to Mr. Green for 2 minutes.
I'm going to try this again, Mr. Chair, through you to Dr. French. When I was talking a little bit about digital epidemiology and the use of data generated outside of our public health systems, I had referenced social media. The reason why I did that is because I'm looking for, in his opinion, where our limits should be. So right now it's cell phone mobility data, but we know that technologies are available with AI for the mass surveillance of, public information. And when that happens, I would argue that the use of social media raises ethical and legal considerations, including the de-identification of data and consent to its use. So broadly speaking, just how far should the government go in the name of public health surveillance? And in your opinion, where should it stop?
Thank you. I think this is a debate that is happening in public health and beyond public health. Colleagues and I in 2020 wrote a paper about contact tracing, talking about what we described as corporate contact tracing, and raising questions for debates for public health authorities and scholars about, an increasing reliance upon private sector organizations to, execute their duties and responsibilities to the public at large. And it does, I think, raise a lot of difficult questions. And I don't think there's a clear, in my mind, way to draw the line. But let's say the fragility of the public health system matched with the incredible data collection capacity of a number of private sector organizations makes it seem quite reasonable that we would turn to Facebook and et cetera, for data. And maybe that's a good idea, but there are also ways in which these public policy turns might drive more business,
All right.
towards these platforms.
Thank you, Dr. French. And now we're going to have, we're a little over time, but I want to get in, I want to allow Mr. Soroka to get a minute in, and we'll have Ms. Khalid will have the final word for a minute. Go ahead, Mr. Soroka.
Okay, thank you, Chair. To Dr. Weinstock, you had talked a lot about public trust of the government. And, the Privacy Commission offered to examine the data to determine to see if it was declassified correctly, and the government declined. Does that sound like that's building trust in the government?
Yeah, so that's a very good example. We have these mechanisms in place, which are, the sorts of things that, the public, people can't look under the hood of these very complex questions. But here's someone who has been nominated precisely because we think that that's their job to. And when they're sidelined, it does tend to raise suspicion that there is actually something to hide. Whereas, and I insist on this point, there might not be anything to hide, and so it becomes increasingly paradoxical that the government chooses to sideline a sort of trust-building institution, where in fact, it could have very well have been that had he looked under the hood at this data collection processes, he would have found that everything was entirely ethically appropriate from a privacy point of view. So it's a bit.
Thank you, Dr. Weinstock. We've got just time now for Ms. Khalid, and the final word in 1 minute, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I will try to be as brief as possible. We've heard from witnesses that the use of data in informing health policy is quite useful as it's balanced. We've also heard from witnesses that there is no perfect process by which we can maintain that transparency. Now, in your paper discussing the harm reduction approach, ethical management of the COVID-19 pandemic, one of the principles that you apply this to is optimizing the use of space and time. Would you agree that mobility data would help increase that efficiency of protecting the public and making sure that there's that finer balance between restrictions and mobility and privacy?
Sure. And so none of what I've said so far should be interpreted as saying that I don't think that we should be doing this. It's, what tests we impose upon ourselves. And I think that, in Canada, we have kind of proportionality thinking. Are we limiting people's freedoms too much? Are we showing that the limitation actually serves the end that we're claiming that it's serving? That's a good framework to do it in. And we also have agencies like the commissioner for the privacy commissioner, who are tasked with doing that sort of thinking for us. And so, I think that we very well could have, I might have ended up in a situation where he would have said, yeah, the use that's being made of this data is entirely proportionate to the very valid end that is being served. But we just haven't got that demonstration from the kind of public body.
I'm really so sorry that I must do this. We're getting excellent evidence for our study, but I just simply can't allow
sorry,
it to. Don't apologize.
Us academics aren't very good at being concise.
Well, there's every opportunity as well for our witnesses to submit written evidence as well for the committee's consideration. So with that, I'm sorry that we had to go late, but I didn't want to shortchange both our panels despite the vote. And with that, the meeting is adjourned.